What's going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be ranking every single TV show that released in 2024 that I saw. Obviously, I have not watched every single TV show season that released in 2024, but I've seen about 15 of them, and so we're going to rank them from the worst to the best. Coming in last place in the number 15th spot is going to be Echo. So Echo is most likely going to end up just being a miniseries. I don't think they're going to do a season 2 because it didn't really have that much love. I do think Maya as a character is definitely going to continue in future Marvel projects, but on her own, I just don't expect to see another season of this show. And I honestly just didn't really enjoy it too much. I thought parts of it were decent. Like I said, Maya as a character is great. I would love to see her probably in Daredevil. I think would make the most sense, just for her to show up in Daredevil Born Again. But in its own show, it just didn't really work. It was a 5-episode series, didn't really have much to it. You could have easily turned this into a movie, and it probably would have been a lot better as a movie, because it just feels somehow so rushed, but also dragged out at the same time, which I don't know how the show managed to feel that way, but it just kind of did. There were a few decent action scenes, but they just paled in comparison to any other like grounded Marvel show. Like if you compare it to Daredevil, for example, Daredevil blows this out of the water. And obviously they had Kingpin in there, which was obviously nice to see him, but I just think this version of Kingpin was probably the least interesting version of Kingpin we've ever seen before. Like, he's much better in the Daredevil show. I would even say he's better in the Hawkeye show, which is kind of crazy to say because I don't think he was that great in the Hawkeye show either. But I just didn't really like him that much in Echo. I thought he was definitely the best part of the show, but I just didn't really feel much. I didn't care as much. And I think Marvel knew this too, because they decided to release this all at once rather than doing it episode by episode. I think they knew that this show just wasn't going to retain much interest all the way through. And I had a lot of hope for this show because of the fact that it was going to be TVMA. I was all on board with it. This was the first Marvel project that was going full on with TVMA. Marvel, you know, MCU Marvel, not regular Marvel, obviously. And so I was like, damn, we're going to actually get some brutal stuff. There's barely any gore or violence in this show to begin with, though. There's a couple moments, sure, but it is so tame in comparison to anything that they've done before, like in the Daredevil show, for example. So it just ended up feeling like a very underwhelming series that ultimately was my least favorite show of 2024. In their 14th spot is going to be The Acolyte Season 1. Now, I actually enjoyed The Acolyte more than I feel like a lot of people did, because a lot of people absolutely despise the show and think it's like the worst thing Star Wars has ever done. I don't think it's that bad. It is not that bad at all. I don't think most of the shows I've seen this year are that bad, but I do think there were some significant problems with this season of television. And of course, most people agree with me because they decided to cancel season 2, so they're not even going to do more of this show. But the structure of this show was so bad. There were so many episodes that barely anything happened in. Like, there was 8 total episodes, and I could say at least 3 of those episodes barely anything happens. There's one episode that just involves the characters traveling to another location, and yeah, of course there's dialogue in there that's important. I'm not going to say it's all filler, but a lot of it could have easily have been kind of reworked into other episodes, or they could have just turned this into a movie. There's a lot of Disney Plus shows that do this, I feel like, where they just feel like a movie that's kind of dragged out to be a TV show, and it just doesn't really work as well as it would have worked if it just was a movie. But I do think there was some promise here. The lightsaber choreography is actually really, really great, especially in episode 5. Some of the best lightsaber choreography we've ever seen in Star Wars. So that alone has to give this series some credit, the fact that there were some really good fights, and the show actually has a lot of consequential deaths. Like, it is not shying away from killing off characters, and I really appreciated that. So there was some really cool moments involving that, but overall the story just wasn't that good, wasn't that well written. A lot of the character motivations were all over the place, just didn't really work for me, which, just like Echo, was a huge shame because The Acolyte was one of the most anticipated shows for me of the last year. In number 13th spot, I've got Chucky Season 3 Part 2. Now, technically, because part 1 of this season released in 2023, I'm only going to be counting part 2. There's another show on this list that's similar to that, where there's one half of the season that came out in 2024. So I'm only going to be counting that specific half of the season. I feel like that would just make this list a little bit more fair, I guess. So Chucky Season 3 Part 2, it was okay. Like, I don't know, Chucky as a whole, this show, I mean, I love the Chucky franchise, but I think the show just didn't really have enough meat on its bones for me to really get invested in most of it. I had fun with watching it. I was always entertained by it, but most of it was just campy entertainment rather than actually being interested and invested in the characters and the story. I thought season 1 was really strong. Season 2 kind of just went too far for me, like too far in the direction of campy to the point where it was almost just borderline ridiculous. I know Chucky is sometimes very ridiculous, but I prefer it being a little bit toned down. And season 3 had a better mix of it, but I feel like they did a better job in the first half of season 3. Once you got to the second half of season 3, just a lot of it didn't work for me as much as the first half did. The main focus here was that Chucky is now getting very, very old due to this curse from Damballa, and so he needs to just have a really big kill, essentially. And he believes that what he needs to do is set off the nuke in the White House, basically killing a bunch of people, right? Which is a crazy plot line, kind of interesting that they were going to do something like that, but obviously, you know, you see it play out, and it ends in a way where I wasn't really wanting a season 4, which is why I'm okay with it getting canceled. I mean, I would have been fine with the season 4 as well. I just wanted to go with a movie next, right? I'm kind of tired of the shows now. I just want them to get back to doing Chucky movies. And I think this half a season kind of proved that to me, that this all would just be so much better if it was just a movie. Like, there's just a lot of stuff that's dragged out and stretched out that doesn't need to be. And so I ultimately don't think this is that great of a season. Well, I guess this half season. In number 12 spot, I've got The Bad Batch season 3. Now, this is actually one of the only shows on this list that I didn't do reactions to, which is kind of interesting. But The Bad Batch season 3, I like The Bad Batch as a whole. I thought it was a decent show, but I think season 3 was probably the weakest of all 3 of the seasons. I just think the dynamic with the characters was just a bit better in the other seasons, and there was overall more interesting arcs that the characters were going through, whereas this season was just kind of tying things up. And I do really like the Asajj Ventress episode. I thought that was definitely the best part of this season, and Omega was definitely at her best in this season. Like, she had the best stories and the best overall character in this season, which makes sense because she was, you know, just developing as the series goes along and becoming more and more of a fighter, and therefore more of an interesting character. Don't really have much to say about this season. I just felt like it was average at best, and I think it was a good place to end the Bad Batch series. In number 11th spot is going to be The Boys season 4. Very shocked that The Boys ended up being this low on the list, because this is a show I really do enjoy quite a bit. I just think season 4 was definitely the weakest of the entire The Boys franchise, even including Gen V. I think this is definitely a weaker season, and it was unfortunate. There's good moments to it, don't get me wrong. I think Homelander and everything involving Homelander in this season is fantastic, especially episode 4 of this season was phenomenal stuff. So, you know, that stuff was great. A lot of good stuff with Butcher as well. Like, those characters are usually consistently solid and don't really have many moments where I'm not really enjoying their characters. But I felt like this season as a whole was mainly just used as a bridge to bring us over to the final season of season 5. It didn't actually feel like its own season whatsoever, which was really unfortunate because, like, I don't want to go a whole 8 episodes with the whole season just feeling like set up for another season, but that's ultimately what it felt like. And regardless of how entertaining it might be, at the end of the day, there's really not much meat to this season. I also think a lot of the humor of the show was just starting to get a little bit too much, to the point where it just didn't work anymore. I feel like The Boys worked really well with its satirical humor. A lot of the satire was based on real events, and I think that worked fine for the first 3 seasons. Season 4, they started going just too far with it, where there would be a whole episode where Huey was just getting abused for like 40 minutes, and it's like used as like shock value humor, and it's just, I don't know, it's just, okay, sure, it's kind of gross, and sure, I guess that's kind of what the show does, but like, what was the point? Like, they don't do anything with it afterwards, so why are we sitting here watching Huey get, like, you know, this nasty shit happen to him where nothing consequential really comes of it other than maybe like one little conversation between him and Starlight? Stuff like that is just like, what's the point? I just feel like the writers start to get so overboard with it, because obviously those moments of the prior seasons are kind of like the big moments where everyone's like, oh my god, The Boys is so crazy and fucked up, and so they just kind of kept doing it again in season 4, and it's like, okay, unless it has an actual purpose, then that's different. I think the whole episode with Homelander, episode 4, there was some messed up stuff happening there. I mean, he was literally forcing that guy to do you know what in front of everyone. That was nasty, right? But it had a purpose. It was showing how messed up Homelander is, and it made sense. It wasn't used for laughs, it was used for holy shits, right? but then they do it later on where it is used for laughs, and it's just like, doesn't really work for me. And it's to the point where I feel like this show is more obsessed with trying to be like currently relevant with politics rather than actually just telling a good story. I'm hoping season 5 turns things around. I think the fact that it's going to be the final season, Soldier Boy is going to be returning, like there's a lot of stuff that I think is going to end up making it a lot better, and obviously they're going to have to start doing some bigger things to kind of conclude this entire series, and I think that'll definitely be good. I'm not one of those people that thinks the show is going on too long or anything like that. I just think this season just didn't have enough meat to it. They could have done a whole separate storyline of some sort to actually build up season 5 better in a way that wasn't just feeling like it was only set up, because that's just ultimately what it felt like. But it's still The Boys, right? It's still good stuff. It's still really high quality television. Like, it is one of the better shows out there currently, so you have to give it credit where it's due. It is a solid show, and I definitely really enjoyed it. Cracking into the top 10, we've got Agatha All Along, season 1. So this was surprisingly good. I was not expecting this to be a decent series. When I was first going into it, I was like, okay, I'm gonna hate this. I'm gonna hate this. I just know it, and I didn't want to hate it. I never go into something wanting to hate it. I was just expecting to, and I came out of it being kind of surprised. I was like, this is actually pretty decent. I don't think it's incredible. I don't think it's like one of the best Marvel projects, but I think it's pretty good. It's overall a well-made show. There is some moments of dialogue that is just a bit like, I don't want to call it bad dialogue, but it's just a little like cringe in some scenes. But the show itself is pretty good. It's got this interesting structure to it where Agatha is taking these different witches down the witches' road to do this bunch of trials, and they're all getting their own thing out of it. But then you learn as the series goes along that things are not what they seem whatsoever. And Billy Maximoff was probably the most interesting part of this season. Obviously that wasn't revealed till later on in the season. It was something most people kind of just knew going into it, but his story was something that I was very interested in right the moment they revealed that, and I was like, oh, this is awesome, like this is cool. And they reveal like how he's in this body. He's not actually in his original like Billy body that he had. I guess it was a fake kid anyways, but you know what I mean. And so I guess that soul that Wanda created went into this other person, and that dynamic I thought was really interesting. And the show itself is actually like mostly well made. There's a lot of cool stuff that they do with it. Like there's a lot of different episodes where they change the aspect ratio just for the hell of it to like fit in with a different theme of the trial that they're doing or whatever it may be. And I think that's really cool. Like this show clearly cares about these characters. It cares about actually being a decent season, and it feels like a TV show. It does not feel like it could have been turned into a movie like a lot of the other Marvel shows do. This genuinely feels like a TV series, and I do think that they could do more of this, and I think they are planning a season 2. So although I had no interest in it at the start, I ended up actually really enjoying it, and even Agatha's character ended up being a character that I kind of like. Did not care about her character from WandaVision really, but she's actually an interesting character now, and this season did that. In the number 9 spot is going to be The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon season 2. So this is a season that honestly a lot of people didn't like. Like I looked all around different opinions online, and most people thought it was pretty bad. And I can understand why. There's a couple of things I really didn't like about it. In particular, there was one major character death that I thought was really stupid. I don't think the fact that they killed them off was that stupid. I thought the fact that they did it so abruptly and they didn't really have much consequence in the overall story, that was what kind of killed it for me. And I was like, okay, well, what are we doing here? Like, what is happening with this show? They just destroyed so many storylines so fast without actually giving a care about them. So that was really obnoxious. But the show as a whole this season I thought was actually pretty good. Like I thought the first 4 episodes were really solid as well. Last 2 were okay. I just think they didn't really land every single thing the best way possible, but I thought it started pretty strong and built off of season 1 quite well. When we actually get to the Daryl and Carol interactions, I thought they were pretty great. Obviously seeing them, do their back and forths and their bickering is always very entertaining. They had a lot of good emotional moments here that mattered a lot. The quality of the show was pretty high, just like season 1 was. I thought, in general, this show has been that way for a while. And I thought Carol actually had probably some of her best moments in this season. Probably since like season 8 of The Walking Dead, I feel like Carol hasn't really had a lot of great moments for a while. Man, I guess season 9 she was pretty cool, but there was a point in like season 10 and 11 where a lot of people weren't really liking her character anymore, myself included. But I feel like she was actually really solid here. So we're getting back to some solid Daryl and Carol stuff, and I'm definitely looking forward to season 3, but I just feel like the season could have been a lot better if they didn't end things so abruptly, and instead they found better ways to conclude some of these characters' storylines. In number 8 spot, I've got Ted season 1. So this was a show that I was really looking forward to because I love the Ted movies. I think they are some of the funniest movies ever. In general, I think Seth MacFarlane is just a hilarious guy who just knows how to make me laugh. Like that his type of humor fits in with my type of humor quite well. I love Family Guy. I think it's a very great series because of Seth MacFarlane. So I was looking forward to Ted season 1 from the moment it was announced, and I think the season lived up to my expectations quite a bit. I think there was, some moments where I was like, okay, I think they're kind of holding back on the humor a bit here. I think he's being a little safer with it, but it was still pretty funny. And even just beyond the humor, I thought there was actually some interesting like storylines that they were going with within the season. It is a prequel series, so Ted isn't like nearly as like messed up in his humor as he becomes in the movies. He's kind of more tame with it, but I think it is an interesting dynamic to see that, like what his dynamic was with Johnny before, like when Johnny was a kid. They did announce a season 2. I have no clue when that's coming out, probably this year sometime, and I cannot wait for it because I just can't wait to see what other funny things they're going to do with Ted. I think he's just such an interesting character. He's just so fucking funny, and yeah, this is a great season of television. How much else to say about it? Now, I'd say there's a pretty big gap between the number 8 spot and number 7 spot. The rest of the shows on this list, I think, are really, really solid and like TV seasons that really meant a lot to me and were really important and really, really big, really good. In number 7 spot, I'm gonna go with The Walking Dead: The Ones Who Live. And I gotta say, this hurts to put it here, even though this is pretty high on the list. Like the rest of the shows on this list, I think are really, really solid seasons of television. But this is The Walking Dead: The Ones Who Live. This is the Rick Grimes return series. I was looking forward to this for like 4+ years. This should have been number 1. Like it should have been number 1. It should have been top 3 at the very least. And it's number 7. So that hurts. But is it still great? Yeah, it is. I really loved it. I just think it really fell flat for me in the final episode. So I would say the first like 4 episodes is genuinely some of the best Walking Dead content of all time, like easily. And if the consistency stayed like that for the last 2 episodes, this would probably end up being one of the best seasons of The Walking Dead. But I just think they completely butchered the ending of the CRM and just the way they concluded the storyline. Like I was so excited because Rick Grimes, Michonne returning, it was like a dream come true, and the budget was there. Like they were doing some crazy things with this show. The first episode I think is one of the best episodes of The Walking Dead history. It's phenomenal stuff, phenomenal writing, great dialogue, great music. Everything was just on point. And I think they continued that quite well. I think Rick and Michonne's reunion was fantastic. I think their dynamic was fantastic. I think the different arguments they had about what to do about their situation was fantastic. Everything was so damn good. And then they get to episode 5, and it's a decent episode. It just felt a little bit less like the other episodes. It felt a little bit like, I don't know, cheesier, if that's the right word to use. I'm not really sure. It just didn't feel the same. And then episode 6 comes around, and I'm like, okay, this could be really, really cool. They're gonna do something crazy. And then somehow they end up taking down the CRM, just the 2 of them, in a very like cartoony Fear the Walking Dead type way. Like it felt like I was watching an episode of Fear the Walking Dead. And so to me, it just kind of dropped the ball. It was still a great episode. It was still really entertaining. But like, how do you end a season like that? How do you conclude the storyline within like 1 episode and just say, oh yeah, this big organization that was this big threat to them, they were able to take down like that? Kind of loses your momentum completely when you do that. You should have built that up to something else, whether it was a second season or more episodes or whatever it may be. But to me, that was just a really poor ending. Spoiler alert, but I'm glad they were able to, have a reunion with Judith and such. Like that was a great moment. But again, it didn't feel as fulfilling as it would have been if it was built up a bit more and there was actually more meat to this season. But because they just kind of like rushed that ending, it came too soon. And I think this is something that, like I said, should have been 2 seasons or perhaps just a couple of more episodes. Like, I don't even think they needed that much more, maybe like 2-3 episodes, and I think it would have worked. But they wanted to make 6 episodes. I don't know. It's just unfortunate because I think it had so much potential. Those first couple episodes were fantastic. So really unfortunate, but still a fantastic season of television that I absolutely loved to watch. And really hope that Rick Grimes returns someday again, just for one more time, because I do think they can do one more thing with him to kind of conclude everything. I want to see him have a reunion with the other characters as well, and I guess we'll have to wait and see if that ever happens. But really, really happy this happened at the very least, because it didn't have to happen, to be honest. They could have just not done it at all, so I gotta be at least happy that they did do it. The number 6 spot is Fallout Season 1. So when I went into this show, I actually haven't played the games before, so I really didn't know what to expect with what this world is all about. And I ended up really, really enjoying it. It had a lot of intense and interesting world building. There's a lot to it, so you could definitely do a lot more with this show. I know they are already planning to do multiple seasons of it. Really solid set pieces. Like, the show is gorgeous looking. The quality of it is really, really high. The writing of it and the overall story that it is centered around is really great. The mystery is all there. Now, obviously, if you've played the games, you probably already know most of what's going on, but I feel like for me, I just had no idea. Like, I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what was outside the vaults. I didn't know what they would come across. I don't know what kind of creatures they would come across, but there's a lot to it, and a lot of it is really, really cool. This whole universe I am now extremely invested in. The main character, Lucy, was fantastic, played very well by Ella Purnell. She's becoming one of my favorite actresses of the modern era. She's in a lot of things nowadays, and she's really, really good, and she was fantastic in this especially. Walton Goggins as the Ghoul was also incredible. Like, those two characters, I think their dynamics alone were fantastic, but I really like his character. He's really, really ruthless and badass, and you kind of learn more about him as the show goes along. You learn he's clearly been through a lot, and that all worked for me. I mean, the opening scene of the show alone was so impactful, so immediately was invested in it, and I cannot wait to see more of this series. Definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it already. The number 5 spot, I've got Invincible Season 2 Part 2. Now, just like Chucky Season 3 Part 2, I have to only rate this part of the season because it doesn't really make sense to count half of the season that released in 2023. So when it comes to Part 2 of Invincible Season 2, I really, really loved it. Like, this show in general is just so incredible, and I feel like it's just getting better and better as it's going along, and Season 2 was no different, and especially the second half. I mean, I thought the first half was decent, but it really didn't start getting really good until that 4th episode. But once you got into Part 2, I thought all 4 of the episodes were very strong. There's a lot of storylines going on, a lot of different things going on. Obviously, it starts with Mark returning home after learning about what his father's been up to on that other planet. And you kind of learn that there's a really huge threat out there with the Viltrumites. And this threat is unlike anything they've ever seen before, so it is obviously a really huge thing. And I know they have a lot of seasons planned for this show. I believe there's like 8 seasons planned or something like that, so there's going to be a lot to this series, but this season really opens up the possibilities for what can come next. And I think once we got to episode 7 with Anissa, who was one of the Viltrumites, she was easily the most terrifying character in this entire show. Like, even more terrifying than Omni-Man, just because Omni-Man obviously has that relation to Mark, so we know he's probably not going to kill him. He might beat the shit out of him, but he's not going to kill him. But Anissa, like, you have no idea, like, what she's about to do. And in that moment, I was just like, oh my God, like, she was sitting there holding Amber with her hand. Like, that was the most terrifying moment in this entire show. And holy shit, like, freaking love that. And all while you have this Viltrumite stuff going on, you also have the stuff with the multiverse and Angstrom Levy, who is this very, very interesting character who got completely messed up due to Mark not really purposely causing it, obviously, but he was, you know, interfering with his projects, and so that caused him to get really messed up. He's a really interesting character because he has like a bunch of different multiverse versions of himself kind of like mushed together into one person. And so that final episode, the, you know, I thought you were stronger moment is like, wow, like that was incredible stuff. It ended really dark this season, and it just got me way more excited for season 3. I cannot wait to see what's going to happen next, but I absolutely loved how they handled the multiverse there. Usually the multiverse is a very touchy, you know, subject. You don't want to misuse it, but I think the show is doing a great job with handling it, and these 4 episodes just did a fantastic job at it. In love with the show, definitely one of my favorite comic book shows of all time. In number 4 spot is going to be House of the Dragon Season 2. Now, this season I genuinely think is one of the weakest Game of Thrones universe seasons, but it still is incredible. Like, Game of Thrones is, you know, the whole universe is one of my favorite franchises of all time now. So the fact that this season's one of the weaker ones that's not really saying much. Like, it really isn't. But I do think there were some problems with it. You can tell a big issue with it was the fact that the last 2 episodes were cut off, and I actually looked into it a little bit, and I'm pretty sure this is what ended up happening, is that they had 2 more episodes planned, but for whatever reason HBO just wanted to make it 8 episodes, and so they had to cut it short. And because of the writer's strike, they actually weren't able to like retool the season to make it work better, so the season's built in a way to where there's supposed to be 2 more episodes, and they were building up to like some big stuff happening in those 2 episodes, and then they just didn't happen. So they're going to happen in season 3 most likely, but that kind of makes season 2 feel a little bit less eventful. The season does have a lot of build up. It has a lot of setup, character development. Some people were calling a lot of it filler. I personally didn't feel like it was filler necessarily, but there was a lot of slower moments, and I was okay with that. I'm not like against that. I just think as long as it builds to something great, then it's worth it. But the fact that that's not coming till season 3 is a little unfortunate. But this season still has some fantastic stuff. I mean, obviously, the Battle of Rook's Rest was holy shit. Like, one of the best episodes of the Game of Thrones universe. Very emotional, very sad. But having dragons just full on in action was just insane. The spectacle of that was amazing. And it was easily the best moment of House of the Dragon so far, at least in my personal opinion. The A Son for a Son moment, although a lot of the book readers really disliked that moment because apparently it wasn't as good as it was in the books. But for me, as someone who didn't read the books, I thought it was a great moment. I thought it was really, really brutal, really horrible to watch, but it has a lot of purpose for the coming episodes. And it was really like back and forth in this whole season between the 2 sides, obviously between Rhaenyra and Alicent. And a lot of times it's not, Rhaenyra or Alicent being the ones to cause the harm on the other, rather it's people involved with them. Like Daemon, for example, he was the one who practically initiated the A Son for a Son moment. And so it's not like Rhaenyra's doing it, and then it just creates a lot more tension between the 2 of them. And then it all builds towards their conversation at the end of the season, which proves that both of them don't want this to be happening at all, but they know there's really not much they can do about it at this point. Rhaenyra getting her army of dragon riders was really, really cool. I loved the actual like process of them having to try to find who's like a worthy dragon rider. Obviously it was very dangerous and it got some people killed in the process, but they ended up finding the dragon riders, and that's gonna have a lot of importance coming into season 3. So in general, a solid season. I mean, it's Game of Thrones. It's gonna be great. There's a really high quality to this show, so you can't hate this season. At least I can't personally, but I do think in the general span of the Game of Thrones universe, it is one of the weaker seasons. In number 2 spot, Squid Game Season 2. I am so happy season 3 is coming out this year. I was not expecting them to do that. Honestly, when I was first starting the season, I thought it was the final season. I had no idea there was a 3rd season coming, but I'm glad there is going to be a 3rd season coming, because obviously they could not have concluded the story within just this one season. They needed to have, expanded into the next one. But I love this season. I think it is an amazing continuation of season 1. It's very different than season 1. I'm glad they didn't just do a repeat of season 1. They found a very different way to implement this story here, because instead of it just being, Gi-hun in the games again, he's now attempting to actually stop the games for good. And he doesn't really know how to do that, to be honest, because a lot of his plans just don't work. Like, they had a plan A, plan B, neither of them worked. So they basically have to go to plan C. And seeing that actually play out was incredible. The games themselves were honestly some of the best games in the series. I mean, obviously they did Red Light, Green Light again, which was probably just as good as the first Red Light, Green Light. But then when they got to the other games, like the one with the mini games where they had to go around the track and do one of the 5 mini games at a time, that was insanely intense. Great moments there. But then the mingle game, I don't know what it was called exactly, but the one with the circle and the carousel that was spinning around, and they had to find a certain amount of people to group up with, and anybody who didn't find a group gets killed each round. That was easily the best game in the series. It was insanely intense. It was so well directed. Some of the most insane moments of the entire series. I loved that episode. I loved that game. And I would say the characters are probably even better than the season 1 characters. I mean, season 1 had great characters with a lot of complexity and a lot of interesting motivations, but season 2, I feel like I have more of an emotional connection to a lot of them. Like, they are really, really strong characters, to the point where the ones that did survive, I'm so curious to see which characters are going to last into season 3, because a lot of them did survive at the end of the season. So I'm so curious, like, what's going to happen, like who's going to live, who's going to die, and those who do die, like, what is it going to do to us emotionally? It's going to fuck us up, I know for sure. That's what makes good television, let's be honest. Like, the best episode of the whole Squid Game was probably season 1 episode 6, and because it was so emotional, because so many major characters died. So this season I really loved. I loved even the stuff outside of the games. Like the first 2 episodes I thought were actually really strong, even though I feel like a lot of people didn't like them. I thought they were some of the best stuff from the season, actually. Even though the games were more entertaining, I think those episodes had just such amazing character moments, especially with Gi-hoon. Overall, fantastic season of television, and in my opinion, probably even better than season 1 of Squid Game, maybe just by a teensy bit. In number 2 spot, I've got The Penguin season 1, which I have no clue if they're going to do more seasons. Probably, maybe, I don't know. I feel like this show got a lot of love. People clearly thought it was incredible, and I'm one of those people. It was fantastic. Every episode was really incredible, really high quality. It is pretty much a movie quality show through and through. It feels just like The Batman, but more content from The Batman. And I love how it just goes into what the like crime world is like in Gotham. It does a lot of world building with that, which is so cool. And obviously Oz as a character is really interesting. I'm also very happy that they actually made him a villain. They didn't do that bullshit that a lot of villain projects do, where they take a villain and then they go, okay, let's actually make them a hero. They're not actually a villain. Like most of the time that doesn't really work, but here they actually just straight up made him an actual villain. He is ruthless. He does terrible things, and pretty much throughout the entire runtime of the entire first season. So I loved that. Sofia Falcone was also incredible in this season, definitely the second best character of this season. But the dynamic between like Oz and his mother and what they do with that was fantastic. Vic and Oz and their relation almost kind of reminds me of a Walter White and Jesse Pinkman from Breaking Bad. I thought that was really cool. And so much happens in just these 8 episodes. Like, it is a lot, to the point where I almost felt like you could have expanded this out for like an extra season or 2 with this same story. I'm glad they did, because it's perfect the way it is, but there's just so much to it, so many different characters that a lot of things change within a short amount of episodes as well. Like, there's characters that are in power at one moment, the next episode they're not in power anymore. Certain characters have certain bonds with certain people and certain deals with them, and then the next episode that all just doesn't hold out. So I thought all of that was really interesting, and made me way more excited for the Batman Part 2 than I originally was, which unfortunately is delayed till 2027. So we have the next 2 years with no Matt Reeves Batman World content, which is just insane. That's insane. I mean, obviously we're gonna get some DCU stuff, but nothing from the Batman. It's unfortunate, but I loved this season and genuinely think it is one of the best comic book shows of all time. And in number 1 spot is going to be Arcane season 2, which I just watched both the seasons for the first time recently on this channel, and I loved this show to death. I think it is honestly one of my favorite shows of all time, definitely in my top 15, and I think season 2 was pretty much on par with the quality of season 1. I don't really think it's like much worse or better. The only thing I didn't like about this season, I do think the last like 2 episodes felt a tiny bit rushed. Like, I do think this season could have been expanded, maybe a couple more episodes, or hell, maybe even a whole nother season. But regardless, the season was still near perfection. I loved so much of it. The Vi and Jinx dynamic in this season is even better than it was in season 1, because they do something really interesting with it. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, where they actually have to start working together in order to try to save Vander, because obviously he's actually alive. So that whole dynamic I really loved. I really appreciated getting to see them work together again in a way that like made sense. It wasn't forced. Like, this actually worked. It's the one thing that would have brought them together. So the fact that they went with that storyline was really cool. Had a lot of emotion to it. I mean, the first season was really emotional as well, but this season was just as emotional. A lot of moments that gonna make you cry. The end battle against Victor's army was absolutely insane. Like, there's some crazy moments there. And again, like I said, it was kind of slightly rushed, but it doesn't change the fact that it was still amazing. Like, you could still have an amazing episode where you still feel like you could have gotten a little bit more out of it, but that was incredible. I loved Jace's character this season. I love what they do with him. Echo had a really cool episode where, he's going through the multiverse into a separate alternate parallel universe that essentially is very different, where Jinx never became Jinx. She was always just Powder. And I thought that was just really, really interesting. And there's just so many themes about perfection and like what it means to be perfect, and why it's okay to not be perfect, why it's okay to have certain like problems with you. And that's basically Victor's character in general, is he's trying to fix that. He thinks humanity has too many flaws with it, and they need to do this whole thing to basically make it so everything's perfect, but you lose that human aspect of it. You lose the aspect of making mistakes and learning from it. And I think that's a really interesting storyline to go that kind of fits with the whole theme of this entire series, because that's kind of what like Jinx was to begin with. When she was Powder, she caused a lot of problems to happen because of imperfections. She was not perfect. She was in a sense a Jinx in some situations, and that caused her to change quite a bit. And I think there were so many fitting ends for so many different characters. It's just so great. I love this season, and it was going to be hard not to put this in the #1 spot. I just felt like I had to do it. I couldn't not do it. This show is incredible, and this season is incredible. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below of this ranking. What are your thoughts of my list? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? And add some shows in yourself that you saw that maybe I didn't see, and you want to let me know how you felt about certain shows. There was quite a few shows that came out this year that I didn't get a chance to see that I did want to see. Obviously, I started Star Wars Skeleton Crew and didn't finish it, so there's that. There was that show with Ella Purnell called Sweet Pea that I wanted to watch and just did not get a chance to watch that either. And a couple others that I just, like I said, didn't get a chance to watch. But I'm going to be doing a most anticipated shows of next year ranking as well. We're going to do that in a separate video. A lot of shows coming out next year that I am really excited for. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I will see you on my next one. Peace out.